It is 10 minutes past 10 and you are listening to Nihal on the BBC Asian Network, and we are talking about the death penalty in India and whether you believe that it's right that there should be a death penalty in India. Perhaps you believe there should be one here. Equally, I would like to know what you think. Yaqub Memon was executed in the early hours of this morning. He was executed because he was involved in the 1993 Mumbai bombings, which killed hundreds, injured over 1,000 people. It struck at the very heart of Indian society, targeting marketplace, stock exchange, and of course, he was convicted of these crimes. If you knowingly become involved in a plot that you know will result in the deaths of hundreds of innocent people, should you deserve to die for that crime? After all, they had exhausted all the appeals. They'd been through due process. Do you believe that the state has a right to exact revenge upon people who kill others? Or do you feel that that is barbaric? It makes murderers of us too, as the Indian MP Shashi Tharoor has said. It is inhuman, as one of the leading Indian newspapers, The Hindu, has said. What are your thoughts? 08459 440 445 is the phone number. Let's speak to Anisha Bhavnani, who's a Indian blogger based in Mumbai. Hello, Anisha.
Hi, Nihal. How are you?
Very well. Thank you for joining us. Anisha, being in India, amongst you and your social circle, are you largely for the death penalty or against it?
I think at least as personally, I feel like I am for it. But when I think of where India is concerned, I do think I am for the death penalty because, I feel like if you've perpetrated a crime that has killed many, many people, or even if it's a single person, even if it's a huge crime or a terrible crime, like we have crimes against women, and if it's that bad, I feel like the person should pay the price for it.
But that is revenge, not justice, isn't it?
I feel like it works as a deterrent, and I feel like in this, to be honest, where this case comes up, I feel a little unreasonable at times when I say that death penalty is justified, but it's just how I feel, because when I read in the newspaper that if there was a huge gang rape and they were sentenced to death, and so I feel safer that there's one less person who can do that terrible thing in our country today, because if he can do something that terrible, should we put him to the same standards of human rights that we give everybody else? Because I feel like it goes down the drain if he's doing something that horrifying.
Stay with us, Anisha. Dr. Priya Bhavnani joins me now, political and economic analyst. Dr. Bhavnani, very good morning to you.
Hi, Nihal. A very good morning to you too.
Anisha says it's a deterrent, and also as well, if someone commits heinous crimes such as this, then they have almost, discounted their membership of the human race. Therefore, we don't have to apply the same rules and values to them, and that they should be punished and lose their lives.
At the very outset, I would like to ask the question that in what way is the death penalty going to serve society? Because we're not simply looking at executing a person as, a punishment for him, but we're looking at the long-term trajectory values that we are giving our society. And no research and no results have proven unequivocally that the death penalty serves a deterrent inherent, either in the case of rape, where often the rapists and perpetrators are then fueled to leave their victim dead rather than alive, or in the case of terrorists and terrorism. And I think with India, where our focus should be in particular is dealing with the ism of terrorism and not the terrorist per se, which means I'm not by any means condoning the cruel bloodbath and the carnage which Memem was in some ways part of. But what I am trying to shine the light on is saying that a death penalty and an execution is more a symptomatic way of looking at it rather than causative. We must put into context that the bomb blast that we're talking about in 1993 also happened right after anti-Muslim riots that killed over 1,000 people in India. So in many ways it was a backlash. India spends 1% of its GDP on healthcare, for example. If we were to channelize more of our resources on developmental issues that also looked at the upliftment of minority communities like the Muslims, there is going to be less of an association of Muslims in our country with the cause of terrorists and terrorism, and we're going to drastically reduce sympathizers and sympathy towards that from amongst our minority community. And I feel that would be a more effective, causative way to look at the problem long term, if only politics were to adopt that.
But of course, what we have, don't we, Dr. Bhavnani, is this popular opinion. I mean, as Anisha was pointing out with the Delhi rapists, there was this groundswell of opinion in India. And unfortunately, the judiciary are not immune to that, are they?
Of course not. I've written very widely and very compellingly about the Delhi gang rapes, and you interviewed me about that as well when I spoke about how with the Delhi gang rapes, we have to, on interrogation, it was found that these perpetrators came from breeding grounds in India where their childhoods were not only financially arid but emotionally decrepit. Society has got to take some kind of responsibility for these beasts that India is nurturing. And I work with underprivileged children who've been through rape and abuse in India. And we have about 50 million such children in India, if not more, which is equivalent to the population of the UK. What do we expect these children to grow up and become?
But Dr. Bhavnani,
society has to take some responsibility.
But provide me the evidence that says that young people who grow up in poor environments and are brutalised become the kind of people that murder and kill in the way that the Delhi rape people did. Because, of course, there is no evidence to suggest that all of them do. Therefore, the law has to look at it and say your poverty and your lack of good parental care is not an excuse, because you know the difference between right and wrong. And that's what it comes down to, doesn't it, in the eyes of the law? Did you know the difference? When you were gang raping that poor young student on the bus, did you know that that was wrong? And the answer, of course, to that is yes, you did know that was wrong.
Psychological research unequivocally shows that there is a direct correlation between such crimes in adulthood and the lack of empathy, compassion and parental.
But then why aren't there tens of millions of murderers in India then? Because that's, of course, your side of it is often called the liberal side of it. And then, of course, the other side of it is saying, well, if that's the case, then why aren't there tens of millions of mass murderers in India going around raping and killing people? There aren't.
We are seeing an increasing amount of social strife in urban areas and in rural areas.
But not anywhere near the levels you're talking about. If you're talking about 50 million, potentially.
50 million such children. There are various psychological problems that they manifest in adulthood.
So how do we punish them then?
Some might be extreme, some might be less extreme. The case I'm making here, the point I'm putting into context is that such punishments, such as the death penalty, which for me to some extent is extreme and playing God, do not address the problem holistically on a narrative level, on the level of discourse, or on the level of serving society society in the long term. We must have legislative measures, but that is only to reflect and to enforce changes in mindset, changes in infrastructure and how society is based. One without the other would be ineffective.
Okay, Dr. Bhavnani, thank you. Anisha, would you like to come back on any of what Dr. Priya Bhavnani has said about we need to look at how these people were brought up and what they, how their upbringing was? Now, by the looks of Yaqub Memon, he doesn't seem to have been brought up in that particular environment that Dr. Priya Bhavnani is describing. But do you think that there is an argument to say we shouldn't be executing these people, we should be looking at the reasons why they became these people?
Nihal, could I just say, I was talking about that in the particular context of rapists.
Of the Delhi rape case, yes, and their background, not with Yaqub Memon.
Yeah, but with terrorism, what the point I was making is we need to look more at the psychology and DNA of the ism as compared to the individual terrorists if we want to look at long-term problem-solving.
But they're two different things. It's not the judiciary's job to do that. It is society and the government's job to do it. The judiciary's job is to, impose the law upon people. That's the judiciary's job. The judiciary's job is not to be sociologists.
Yeah. My concern is what's happened in India now is there's been a haste. Public opinion is being one that's wanting the death penalty for Memon and have felt that the death penalty has been long overdue, feeling that that would actually fix the problem of terrorism and give, the message that India is strong on terrorists. Whereas I feel that is not going to be a deterrent. Rather, that if anything, that is going to produce even more backlashes. And hence, that is my concern that we need to look at this in a more holistic manner and through different dimensions.
Dr. Bhavnani, let me bring Anisha back in. Anisha.
So I agree a lot with Dr. Bhavnani on many of the things she said about how the government should take care more for minorities and the like, so that they don't go up and do this. I do understand that. But I also feel that, I feel a little inexperienced also. I'm only 18 years old. But as an 18-year-old girl in Mumbai, when I read about these things, I have a lot of rage. And I'm sure my friends do. And a lot of us in India, when we're reading about these things happening to our daughters, to our sisters, to our mothers, and to read about this, it gives us a lot of rage. So I feel, I know that it's not the best way to channel rage is by killing someone, because then we're just like them. But I do feel that when I got the notification on my app today on my phone saying that Yaqub Memon was killed, I felt better, and I don't know, I don't like saying it, but it feels good because I feel like I'm safer now because there is one less person who can do that to me. So I do understand when you're saying that you have to look at the ism and not the terrorist. But what about that terrorist? It was the terrorist who aided in the killings of 350 people and 1,200 people were injured. So I don't think we can excuse them saying, okay, no, we should look at the bigger picture, which we should. But it's also the smaller details that matter. So I still stand by it, and I do think that irrationally, I felt better.
Anisha and Dr. Bhavnani, thank you very much indeed. In a little while, I'm going to be speaking to Kishwar Desai, human rights activist.